LGBTQ plus community. Like I said, I am going to be talking about hate crimes, and my name is Alaya. I'm a first year student here studying my generals, and we're going to talk about hate crimes and death rates on transgender women. So, Gwen, Nakia, Duana, Ruby, Angie, and Tasia. What did these names represent, you may ask? People. They represented people who, like everyone else, just wanted to be themselves. All the people I have mentioned have been brutally murdered and killed, whether it was shot, strangled, viciously attacked, and some even resorting to self-harm and death by suicide. Along with this, transgender women have to constantly deal with mental, physical, verbal, and sexual abuse. Considering all this, why does it seem death rates and hate crimes are so high amongst the transgender women community? Some of the key words I want to talk about with you guys today are gender dysphoria, what transgender is, hate crimes, and suicide. We will also be talking about a few of the women I actually mentioned in my introduction. We will be talking about Gwen Araujo and Angie Zapata, and also the suicide rates that are associated with transgender women. So gender dysphoria, or GD, refers to the distress related to a marked congruence between one's assigned gender at birth and their experienced gender. So basically, they're not comfortable in the body that they were born with, and they're more comfortable being the opposite sex, or vice versa. What does transgender mean? According to dictionary.com, it means noting or relating to a person whose gender identity does not correspond to the person's sex at birth. Gender dysphoria, or GD, as we talked about, refers to the distress related to a marked congruence between one's assigned gender at birth and their experienced gender. They feel more comfortable living as the opposite sex. But being who you truly are is something people in this world will always judge you for. So it's very understandable to find out studies have shown when it comes to transgender people's mental health, they suffer far more greatly than non-transgender people. Now on to our more morbid terms for the day, starting with hate crimes. A hate crime typically involves violence that's been motivated by prejudice, whether it be because ethnicity, religion, or in our case, sexual identity. Our final term we need to understand is suicide. Oh, here's a quote by the Washington Post. It reads, "Trans people are extraordinary, strong, intelligent, persistent, and resilient. We have to be, and we will not stand for the picking and choosing of rights. We still have hope." And that's going back to they were people too. Okay, a hate crime typically involves violence that's been motivated by prejudice, whether it be because ethnicity, religion, Our final term we need to understand is suicide, which is intentionally causing one's own death. Many things including impulse, stress, bullying, or harassment to a person can experience extreme measures. I found so much interest in this topic personally because I watched the film about Gwen Araujo, A Girl Like Me. I watched it on Tubi. You guys can watch it on there for free if you want to. It's a really good movie. I cried probably like the whole time, 4 times, 5 times at least. It's a film dedicated to the 17-year-old Newark, California teen born as Eddie, but now well known as Gwen Amber Rose Araujo. She, like any normal teen, tried to go to high school, but due to the bullying and harassment, she ended up dropping out and looking for a job so she could save money, get her surgery done, and move to Hollywood. She told her mom, I'm going to do makeup for movie stars. But after applying to a few places and her application getting lost, she got discouraged. She then threw the rest of her energy into boys, parties, and makeup. She spent most of her summer in 2002 at the Merrill House, talking about Jose Merrill. As fun as she was beautiful, it didn't take long for Mike Jose and Jose's brother to have some type of sexual relations with her. Eventually, some of the guys compared stories and wanted to know why they had such similar experiences with Gwen, keeping her clothes on because her period. They eventually brushed it off, but Jose couldn't let it go. Mike taunted him by feeding into the idea she was a guy. A few nights later on Thursday in October, they had done their usual bar hopping and wind down at Jose Merrill's house. They had arranged to meet Gwen, who they knew as Lita, because she would use surnames to go around and hang out with different people and party and stuff. After getting settled into the house, they got straight to it and quickly started asking Lita personal questions. Just answer the question, they told her. You're cool to have around and we just want to know. After a few moments sitting in silence, they forced her to go to the bathroom and show them. After trying relentlessly to get her to take her bottoms off, Lita ran for the door in an attempt to escape. And they showed this in the movie actually, and it's like really pretty sad. But Mike grabbed her and he inhumanely stripped her of all her bottoms, stating balls, effing balls. Some of her last words included, please don't, I have a family. She was then brutally beat to death with a can of food. She was then wrapped in a carpet, and they drove 150 miles or so away from where they're from and left her, and they dug up in the ground for hours on end in total silence, they said. And then after all this, they came back to the city, and the first thing they did was get McDonald's. And that's actually something that her mom brought up in an interview she did for like the news and stuff. She said, my baby was like dead in the ground, and the first thing they went to do was get food. So that just goes to show how brutal these hate crimes are. Anyways, she was left like she was nothing. As told by Mosier 2005, by the time her mutilated body was extracted from rocks and dirt, Gwen Araujo had already been transformed into a civil rights martyr. As a result, Mike Magnuson and Jose Morel were sentenced to 15 years to life in prison for second-degree murder. Jason Cazares, who struck a deal with prosecutors, received a 6-year sentence. And Jaron Neighbors, who testified against the others and was sentenced to 11 years in prison. This case was one of the first prosecutions of an anti-transgender murder under a transgender inclusive hate crime law. And actually, of the 4 men who killed her, Jaron Neighbors was the only one to apologize to her family, along with them. And Mike Magnuson is still in prison to this day. I'm pretty sure the other ones were released. The next transgender teen that I'm going to share about is Angie Zapata, who is on the left. And I believe that's one of her older sisters. I'm not sure, but I know that's Angie on the left. Who at the age of 18 years old in her own Greeley, Colorado apartment was murdered by Alan Andrade. Angie, who was brutally murdered on July 17, 2008, her killer, Alan Andrade, was 31 at the time and admitted to police that he met Angie online, that they went on a date, and that he viciously beat her to death. Angie was the second youngest sibling in the family, and by the age of 16, she was living full-time as Angie. She, like other transgender people at the time, dropped out of school due to bullying and harassment. She moved to Greeley, Colorado, got her own apartment, and began babysitting her nephew and 4 nieces full-time. She had planned on moving to Denver to pursue her dreams in fashion and cosmetology. She was a vital part of her family and community. A lot of people adored her. Her older sister Monica, had told New York Times, we love to take her out because she got so much attention. I couldn't even take her to Walmart because people would turn around and everyone knew Angie. In the few weeks leading up to her murder, she had met Alan Andrade through a social networking site called Moco Space. According to Andrade's version of the events, they exchanged hundreds of emails and texts and then decided to go on a date. And after their date, they went back to Angie's apartment where Andrade spent the night. The next day, while Angie ran errands, Andrade began to question her identity after sneaking around her apartment and looking at pictures. When Angie returned home, he immediately confronted her. He then grabbed her genitalia and beat her with his fist and a fire extinguisher. He then proceeded to ransack her apartment. As Angie lay there fighting for her life, gasping for air, Andrade heard her, and he went there and beat her further until she eventually was killed. He fled the scene, taking her credit cards and her car keys, and her car, obviously. Monica found her young sister laying on her living room floor, lifeless, with a sheet covering her body. Angie's murder received widespread media attention locally and nationally in both English and Spanish outlets. Prosecutors charged Andrade with premeditated murder, felony motor vehicle theft, felony identity theft, and he was also charged with a felony hate crime. Which, on the article I read originally, they thought that this was the first ever to be convicted in the country, but it was actually Gwen Araujo in 2002, because this was in 2008. Andrade and his lawyer tried to have the charges against him reduced due to him being provoked because he didn't know she was transgender. According to an estimate by the Human Rights Campaign, transgender Americans face a 1 in 12 chance of being murdered. But due to violence against transgender people is usually underreported, and identities of transgender murder victims misreported. So there's really no way to know accurate numbers. To add even more fuel to this fire, transgender women are also more likely to die by suicide than transgender men and the general population. A study was done to explore the overall suicide death rates, the incidences over time, and the stage and transition where suicidal deaths were occurring throughout time. Only one cohort distinguished suicide death risk amongst trans men and women. It found that trans women are at an increased risk of suicide death compared with trans men. Another study was done on 8,263 transgender adults between 1972 and 2017. The overall goal of the study was to explore suicide death rates in transgender people. 49 of those 8,000 people died by suicide, 41 of them being transgender women. The median time between the first time they went to the clinic, and by the time they died by suicide was 6.7 years. The study found transgender women had an overall higher suicide death risk than transgender men and the general population. Considering all this information, it can be understood why transgender women are more commonly sought out after and discriminated against. Whether their deaths are due to murder or self-harm, this is a community of people fighting for their way of life and literally fighting for their lives. Their deaths are a result of hate crimes, discrimination, brutal attacks, and pleas of gay panic defense. But in the end, these women were people like you and I. Like Sylvia, Gwen Araujo's mother said, "Murder is murder. A child is a child. This is an issue of humanity." Thank you for listening. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you.